the budget that we face, the crisis that we face, about the options that are on the table to deal with it, and then have a conversation with you. I want to hear your thoughts, I want to hear your questions, and do my best to answer them. I've said throughout this whole process from day one that it's important to me to talk about the hardest issues as openly and honestly as I can, to do it transparently, and to have real two-way conversations. And so I'm having 6 town halls in the space of about 10 days to talk about it. I had one up at the Parker Center last night, and I'm very glad to be here tonight. I also just want to acknowledge Councilman John Gale, who we're on his home turf. He lives just around the corner from here, but good of him to be with us as well.
Across the street.
Across the street. The city of Hartford right now is facing a fiscal crisis that we haven't seen ever before. You know, the city of Hartford has faced budget deficits before, and in fact, it seems like year after year, there's always a deficit. There's always some gap that has to be closed. But what we're facing right now really can be described as a Category 5 fiscal hurricane. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But first, let me just give you a sense of the size. Next year, first let's start with this year. This year, the budget year that ends June 30th, we're going to end at about $10 million in deficit. We're going to have to pull from fund balance, that's the rainy day fund, about half the money that's in there we're going to have to pull to close the books this year. Because the budget that was passed last year was never really balanced. Not only was it not balanced on paper, what was on paper wasn't really true balance either, because it relied on one-time revenues. Pulled $16 million from an employee benefit reserve over at the Board of Ed, had about $10 or $12 million from bond premium, which is one-time payments that we got from a bond issuance. So if you add those together and then add the $10 million deficit that we're going to end in, you're talking about a budget that's more than $30 million out of balance this year. Next year, our deficit grows, and it's going to be over $40 million. So how did we get there, and why are we facing those kinds of numbers? There are a lot of reasons. One, we have borrowed a lot as a city over the years. And then when it came time to pay the bills, we pushed out the payments. Refinanced the debt, just like refinancing the mortgage on your house. And we did it not just once, but twice, where we took those payments and we said, we can't deal with them right now, we're going to push them out into the future. Well, we're hitting that future now. Next year, our debt service, which we're going to spend $10 million on this year, will be $30 million next year. The year after that, it's just short of $40 million. The year after that, it's just short of $50 million. It goes up and peaks in 2021, so it keeps rising for the next 5 years. And that assumes we don't do a single additional capital project that requires us to borrow more money, which isn't realistic. So we're going to be facing debt service that's even higher than that. Our pension funding, which in 2010 required us to pay about $10 million into the pension fund, is now costing us more than $40 million a year. And it's growing, partly because of the way the market's been performing. Beyond that, we've got structural issues that were beyond the control of any mayor, any city councilor. You know, I think some of those things I do think were mistakes in the past, but there's something that I don't think we can blame anybody for. We have a city that's 17.5 square miles, where half of our property is non-taxable, where we support institutions that serve the entire region of the state, hospitals, universities, state government, and we also serve some of the poorest communities and neighborhoods in the entire country. We cannot do that on our own. But as a state, we haven't yet realized that we're not building our cities in a way that helps them succeed. So you've got that structural problem, and you've got mistakes of the past. And all of that is adding up to a deficit that is so big that in a few years, you could eliminate, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting we would do this, but I'm only saying this to give you a sense of the size. We could eliminate the entire police department and the entire fire department and still have a deficit. There's no way to solve that problem with only one type of trick. You can't just cut your way through a deficit like that. You can't just put your hand out and ask, our big companies to pay more to solve that kind of problem. I frankly don't think there's a lot of room to raise taxes in a city that's got a mill rate of 74 and change. You compare that to cities, our peer cities like New Haven and Bridgeport, their mill rate are in the low 40s. Ours is at 74. Now our residents already pay a lot, although they're assessed. You're assessed if you're a resident at a lower percentage of value. But our small businesses and the commercial property owners who we need to come in to invest more if we're going to grow the grand list and start growing our way out of this problem, they can't sustain the taxes they've got already. I don't think there's any way they can sustain a higher burden than they've got. So in most situations, a city or a town can say, look, it's a painful thing to do, but we're going to raise the mill rate. If we do that, I think we're slowly killing the city. So we need to do it head on. We're going to have to make cuts. There's no way to do it without layoffs. There's no way to do it without some reduction in services. And there's no way to do it without taking a new approach to our contract negotiations and making sure that we're negotiating deals that the city of Hartford can support and sustain. And as we do all that, we have to do that knowing that even that won't get us there. We then have to go to our big tax-exempt institutions, and we have to say, we know how much you do for this city, we know how much you do for the region, but we need help. And we've got to go to our biggest taxpayers, our biggest companies, who already pay an enormous amount, more than they would pay anywhere else, who give philanthropically to the city, who support a lot of institutions around our city and do a lot of good. And we're going to have to go to them and say, we need help. And even that won't get us there. A city our size, a city in our fiscal position, a city facing the kind of crisis we have, I don't think we have the luxury of funding our pension up to 100%. Give you a sense of what that means. I told you we're paying more than $40 million a year into the pension. Well, this year about $15 million of that is the amount that we have to pay just to keep up the new obligations that build up every year. But $25 million of that or more is catch-up payments. It's the amount we're paying to get our pension from 77% funded all the way to 100% funded. I don't think we're in a position to do it. So there are a bunch of things that we're going to have to do to close that budget. We're going to have to cut. We're going to have to negotiate new contracts. We're going to have to ask for help from the nonprofits and from the big companies. We're going to ask all we can from the state, but you know what the state situation is like. And I think the truth is we're playing defense up at the Capitol, just trying to hold the line and not get cut further. And I think we need to pay a little bit less into the pension. All of that will help get us there. And maybe buy us some time to try to do the work we need to do to grow this city. We can't do it by raising the mill rate. And we can't do it by doing what's been done year after year, which is finding ways to patch it together with one-time revenues that you don't get to use again. We can't sell any more parking garages. We can't take any more big chunks of employee benefit reserves. It's just not there. And it's not a responsible way to close the budget when you're facing the crisis we've got. Because even if you figured out a way to scrape our way through 17 without making fundamental changes, we face an even bigger problem the year after. So where do we go from here? I think we need to give ourselves some more tools to do all those things that I just laid out. Because not everything that I just laid out is allowed under state law. I'll give you an example. Right now, not just state law, but also city. Our charter, our city charter requires us to fully fund whatever the pension commission recommends that we pay. That's the $40 million. I'm required as mayor to make that recommendation in my budget, and John and his fellow councilmen are required to approve that. We don't have any ability to say, Pension Commission, respectfully, we understand that you have a fiduciary duty to the trust and you want to get it funded up to 100%, but we just can't get there right now. We don't have the ability to do that, and so we need a change in state law. Right now, if we're able to achieve savings and efficiencies in education, if the Board of Ed is able to find cost savings in central office or elsewhere, if they're able to renegotiate and they can find savings, none of that really comes back to us. Because if we decrease the amount that we give to the Board of Ed every year, all of the state money that we get can get pulled away. So if we want the possibility to preserve the possibility of getting all that state funding, even if we have to, in crisis, come a little bit under the minimum that's required by the state, we need to change the state law. I proposed a bill that would do those things and would also do a couple more things. Most importantly, and most controversially, and I want to talk about the issues that are controversial too. Most importantly and most controversially, it would set up an alternative to the normal arbitration process at the end of the labor negotiation. Here's the way it usually works. The city negotiates with unions. If you can't agree on the terms, then it goes to arbitration. And the body that is the arbiter, or the referee that ultimately decides what the city has to pay in its contracts, is a panel of 3 people. One selected by the union, one selected by the city, and one neutral selected by the two. Very often that neutral is in the business of making sure that they get selected again, so they don't really want to upset anybody. And so the history tends to be that unions do pretty well in that process, in the arbitration process. Even more than that, the panel can't look at the 2 offers and say, you know, we're going to decide somewhere in between. Instead, they just have to pick one offer or the other. So if labor's up here, the city's down here, they can't say we're going to split the difference. They've got to choose between the 2. Which means when you go into that process as a city, you're rolling the dice. You don't know which way it can come out. It might come out the way the city wants, or it might not. But for a city in crisis, I don't think we can afford that risk. So I propose that there be a commission set up that has appointees from the city council, myself, an official from the state, residents and taxpayers appointed by the council and the mayor, respectively, the city treasurer, and that commission serves as the referee in situations where we can't reach agreement in our negotiations. So that at least the referee who's making that final decision has as their ultimate purpose the financial sustainability of our city. I'm a Democrat. I'm a proud Democrat, and I've been a proud supporter of labor. It's not easy for me to propose that. And there are a lot of people who have strong feelings about it. But it's the best thing I can think of to help us deal with a situation that we've got. It's been done before. It was done in Waterbury when they faced a financial crisis. And it's been done elsewhere. And it will help us to do the kind of deeper restructuring that we need to do to get ourselves on a long-term path to growth. And by the way, if we're not doing that kind of long-term change, if we're not addressing some of the structural issues, I think we're going to have a really hard time going to those tax-exempt institutions that I talked about, or going to our big companies that are already paying 74 mills and asking them to do more. We have to do it all. Nothing in the bill takes away power from the city council. Nothing in the bill gives the state power over our city. Nothing in the bill opens up contracts that are already in place. It simply says that when that negotiation happens, there's another body, another referee at the end of the process that helps ensure a result that the city can actually financially sustain. I think we need it, and I'm going to push hard for it. Regardless of whether we get it, we're going to have tough decisions to make. This bill doesn't make our decisions any easier. we don't get to choose between changing some salaries and benefits and layoffs. We are going to have to do both. But if we can get some changes in salaries and benefits, we won't have to do as many layoffs. And for a city that's already lean, whose workforce is already working hard, with a fire department that's as small as it's been in a long time, a police department that's as small as it's been in a long time, a DPW that's as small as it's been in a long time, there's not a lot of fat to cut. So I want to try to avoid every position cut we can. And that means we're going to have to change our the way we negotiate. As we do this, go forward in this process, there'll be a lot of opportunities for public engagement. So I want to talk for a minute just about the budget process. Right now, I've been sitting down with my department heads. I've asked them for different scenarios. What do they need if they're going to keep their current operation just as it is? What would they do if I needed to ask them to give us 30% savings? Those are tough conversations, because 30% savings isn't easy. But after those conversations, we're going to put together the best budget we can, dealing with the crisis we face. And on April 18th, I'll submit it to the City Council. The City Council will then have a little more than a month to make their decisions about it, to review it, to make their changes, and to pass a budget. And by the end of May, we will hopefully come together on a budget that's balanced, that balances the budget honestly, that does it without an over-reliance on one-time sources of revenue that are going to disappear and leave us in the same position next year. That has to be our goal. And my pledge to you is that through this process, I will continue to come out and talk as openly, as directly, and as honestly as I can about the decisions we've got to make, the recommendations I'm making, and the challenges that we face. So with that, why don't I stop talking? Invite anybody who wants to come on up to the mic. I'd be happy to take any questions or hear any comment. I only ask that so that we can make sure everybody has a chance to speak. If you can keep your comment or your question to a minute, that will make sure that everybody gets their time. Thank you again to Noel Webster for giving us the room tonight. And who's up?